Yes, they targeted ambulance and the people inside it were killed. يا إلهي. يا هلا الله.
Someone who was.
Guys, we need to move it quick. Allah! Hey! Come! Get down! Let's move.
Okay, so what are we doing now?
We should move back.
This way?
أنا عارف أنا وحمود الثاني ما جاش معنا ما جاش ولا واحد معنا. مش عارف ما هو الدبابات حوالينا قاعدين يصفوا علينا.
I think we should hide.
pushing من الشارع الملعب قاعدين.
We should move.
Yeah, but when we move, what
Yes.
did they not shoot?
Well, I think they will shoot.
شوف أنت لو حصلت مع بهيمة بحليمة.
Yeah, Allah, I'm now scared.
يا رب. طب أنا ما فيش إصابات هنا. ما أنا لا أنت هيك تتحرك هتقتلنا رسمي. أنت هذا موت.
اسمع.
في حاجة بتتحرك قاعد بتقزدر في المكان. ماخذ راحتها. دبابة ولا.
يا منير
تقدر تتحرك انت؟ Guys, let's move.
The hand.
والله يلا اشهد ان لا اله الا الله. يلا ارحمنا يلا يا رب.
Tell them to stop.
Hey, he's stuck it. He took another shot.
And they're gonna start going around us now because they know there's more people here. So we need to actually. I know. What the fuck should we do? I know. Look, everybody's gonna get shot.
Oh, the anti-Semitism thing? Yeah. You know, when you have no argument, then you start calling people names. I mean, not you, but that's what people do. When there's no argument, they start calling people names. Okay, you're an idiot. Okay. Now, can we go back to the topic? Can you explain to me why it's okay for an Israeli soldier to execute a Palestinian on the ground who never did anything wrong to begin with and should not have been shot to begin with? Explain this to me. You know? Can you explain to me why Palestinians are denied water? Can you explain to me why 2 million people, or nearly 2 million people in Gaza, on a regular basis as a policy, are subjected to massacres? Massacre after massacre, where thousands of innocent civilians die, and the ones that don't die remain there without access to proper health care. That's how you deal with it. The only reason they used anti-Semitism and self-hating and all these other, stupid names is because they have no argument. They want to steer away from talking about the issue. So they say anti-Semitism, and a lot of people are offended when they're called anti-Semites, But the thing is, like Helena said, you get over it and you go back to the issue. Okay, let's assume I'm anti-Semitic. Can you explain this to me, though? Because if opposing Israeli policies is anti-Semitic, if opposing Israel is racist, what do you call people who support this monstrosity? What do you call yourself for supporting this? An entire nation is standing behind a soldier, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, the soldier who executed, and now the guy that was on the ground never did anything. He did not attack. He is not a terrorist. He did not attack the soldiers. Not that I think that attacking soldiers is terrorism, but he was not a terrorist. He did nothing wrong. He was at the wrong place at the wrong time. He had his hands up, and he was shot to the ground. Israeli ambulances drove right around him, knowing full well there was no threat. They're saying, oh, maybe he's got explosives. They knew that he didn't have explosives because he was checked. And I mean, he was just there. And then this young soldier shows up on the scene. He stops and speaks to an officer. It's very clear in the video. He hands this officer his helmet so his hands are free, walks up with his gun, shoots him in the head while the officer is looking. So he was either obeying an order or he had consent to do what he did. And he didn't think he was doing anything wrong. And most people don't in Israel.
And he first
You know?
asks, is the dog still alive?
That's somebody else is asking. Somebody else on the video saying, oh, this dog is still alive. That's one of the paramedics. That's one of the paramedics saying, this dog is still alive. So that is the reality. So if opposing this is anti-Semitism, I'm perfectly fine with being anti-Semitic. But what do you call people who support this? What do you call a person who supports this kind of policy? And this just happened to come out because somebody took a video.
And people are questioning this one-sided support for Israel through the years, and people are questioning the Israeli narrative of what is going on. You know, is it really Israel defending itself against the Palestinians, or is it Israel attacking a besieged and occupied people, which is the other narrative? And I think they don't want any facts to get out, actually.
And what is the truth? I mean, you've been there for 30 years now, I believe. As you said, you were there for the last war. What is it that you saw? I mean, who is it? Can you blame one party?
Well, I don't think it's a question of blaming. I think it's a question of being realistic and be factual. And the facts on the ground are very clear. This is not a difficult conflict. This is a difficult occupation. And the Palestinian people have been under more or less severe Israeli rule, or military rule, for the last close to 70 years. And it's getting worse and worse every day. The apartheid elements in this rule is more and more clear to people. And the military attacks on Gaza, 4 since 2006, have been extremely unbalanced from the perspective of using proportional force. And you see it in the numbers. I mean, they killed 2,200 during the last attack, which lasted for 51 days. Among them were 521 children. Now, if you ask yourself the question, what would have happened if the Palestinians would have killed 521, God forbid, Israeli children? On the Israeli side, 74 were killed, among them 4 civilians and 66 soldiers, 1 child. That is 1 child too much. No Israeli child should get killed, nor should 521 Palestinian children get killed.
Do you think the Israelis have a right to be frightened? I mean, there are some Israelis, particularly in the Ashkelon area, who suffer from a barrage of rocket attacks. I mean, there is fear there. Should they be frightened?
Well, I think you should ask them. I think the real situation on the ground is that the Palestinian people are trying to defend themselves against an oppressor, an occupier who is using immense military forces against them again and again, killing thousands of Palestinian innocent civilians and children, maiming tens of thousands again and again. And if you look at the sheer numbers do not indicate that they should be scared on the Israeli side. Last year, 6 Israelis were killed. It's the lowest number since 2000, actually.
You talk about the disproportionate force against the Palestinians, knowing that there's been a lot of criticism about the way Hamas and Hamas's leaders behave, the fact that they do get involved in family situations. Now, as you know, Gaza is a very densely populated place, so it's probably hard for them to operate without in a more secure area. So they've been accused of using Palestinians as human shields. They've been accused of being provocative, attacking the Israelis, knowing how Israel would respond. Is there any truth in that?
No, that's the Israeli narrative. That's so well propagated in the West that everybody believes it's true. It's not true. I'm not a military person, I'm a medical doctor. But I see what's happening on the ground in Gaza. They have been under siege for 7 years now. They're lacking everything. Food, water, rebuilding of bombed residential areas, building schools that have been bombed, water pipelines, sewage systems, everything. And there is a chronic malnutrition. This is the true attack on the civilian population in Gaza. The fighters, the resistance, the Palestinian resistance, is trying, with their quite simple and meager weapons, to defend an occupied population. And according to international law, an occupied people do have the right to defend themselves, even with weapons. So I think it's turned upside down all the time.
Okay.
And if you look at the sheer numbers, there is no doubt that those who are taking the toll are the Palestinians. Now, to the blame or to the accusation that Hamas is hiding, there is absolutely no proof that Hamas or the other fighting fractions in Gaza are using human shields. On the contrary, there are numerous proven facts that Israeli forces are taking Palestinian civilians as human shields. So all the time we are being, in a way, fed this Israeli, very efficient storytelling about, oh, little poor Israel being attacked by the Palestinians. It's not true. It's the opposite.
Before we talk more about the political solution, I mean, Israel often says that it needs to take this action in order to contain the Palestinians and to lower the threat level. Does that happen, or do you create a possibly more militant society if you keep hitting them the way Israel is?
Listen to your words. Contain the Palestinian people. What is that? To contain a people, to be an occupant. It's illegal. And as I said, the occupied people have the right to resist. We were occupied by the Germans for 5 years. I make no comparison with the Israeli state and the German state, but occupation can be compared to occupation. And our heroes today are the ones who fought the occupation with arms. So, of course, with this increasing pressure on Gaza in particular, I mean, they have been besieged for 7 years. Now, Egypt has also closed the border in Rafah. And the situation inside, it's 1.8 million people. And more than 1 million of them are children and youngsters. The average age in Gaza is 17.6 years. This is a child ghetto. And what amazes me when I go to Gaza is that they are not more desperate than they in fact are. That there is so much calm, so much organized society, and so much discipline and humanity in Gaza.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you about the psychological impact of this continuing onslaught, the fact that you are basically in an open-air prison. I mean, so many children have seen their parents, their friends, their relatives die. What does that do to you?
Well, the harder you boil them, the harder they get, pertaining to your previous question. And of course, this is a very consolidated people. When I was there during the last attack, and mind you, I used the word attack deliberately, not war or conflict. It was an onslaught. It was a one-sided onslaught on a people who are not even allowed to escape the fighting. If they really wanted the Israelis to have a man-to-man fight between the military fractions and their own army, why don't they open the siege and let the civilians fly? They don't. On the contrary, they diminish the area of Gaza by 25%, and they condense the population even more. And there is nowhere to escape. There are no safe place. There is no shelter.
People ask what for? What can Shannon Aaron do? Well, the answer is, in the international context, nothing. You know, nobody will pay that much attention to what Ireland does. But the only reason I looked for a recall of the Senate was because I remember being in Palestine some years ago, in an area that was heavily controlled by the Israelis, and I said to my Palestinian hosts, you know, there's nothing I can do. You know, I will have no effect. And they said, but at least you will be a witness. You will be a record to our suffering, and we will not go unnoticed. And it's for that reason that I called for the recall of the Senate. I'm very sad. I mean, I'm not anti-Israeli, I'm not anti-Semitic. I supported the State of Israel. But in the 40 years I've known the State of Israel and sometimes had a home there, I've seen it completely change. It changed from a left-wing, socially directed country to an extreme right-wing regime that is behaving in the most criminal fashion and defying the world and unscrupulously using the Holocaust to justify what they're doing. And it's time that rag was torn away from them. Israel is afraid of Palestinian unity. That's what all this is about. It has nothing to do with the murder, which is appalling, of those 3 Israeli kids. It's nothing to do with it. The Israeli police knew that Hamas had nothing to do with it. Before this war, started. And with regard to Hamas, Israel created Hamas in order to split Fatah. So they're responsible for Fatah. And I had that confirmed at the highest level in the foreign ministry in Jerusalem some years ago. And I have to say, it is astonishing to me that the West prates about democracy. Every time an Islamic government crops up around the Mediterranean, they refuse to deal with it. They subvert it. They destroy it. Where's the democracy in that? We may not like it. You know, they may be antagonistic, and my Jewish friends or my Israeli friends say to me sometimes, how would you fare as a gay man in any of these? Oh, I know exactly how I'd fare, but it doesn't mean that it is correct to deny people the right to choose their own government. What self-respecting or sane people would allow their enemies to choose their government for them? Can you imagine it happening in this country? I certainly cannot. And America has a shameful role to play in this. Israel could not get away with these disgraceful acts of international piracy and brigandage if it wasn't for the protecting shadow of the United States of America. And I condemn President Obama for his utter inaction. And I have to say, I was taken a bit aback when I saw they'd added in Ukraine, which is irrelevant. It's a bit of whataboutery. What about Syria? What about the Congo? What about Iraq? What about everything? Well, we should focus on this. The one thing it does, Minister, is it shows the extraordinary discrepancy. At the instructions of the Americans, we're prepared to boycott, to go in after the Russian banks, to do this, that, and the other. And what do about Israel? We don't even mark a protest note with our vote in the Human Rights Commission of the United Nations. I think that's shameful, absolutely shameful. And as I interjected, it'd be better to be one country in the right than with all the rest of them in the wrong. There are no words to describe what happened yesterday in Jabalia. 6 attacks on schools, and these are deliberate. I have no doubt. Because you had 3,300 people sheltering there. They'd been directed there by Israel. The coordinates were given 17 times. How could anybody claim that they didn't know what they were doing? Israel's policy is shoot first and weep afterwards. Oh, did we hit children? What a terrible tragedy. Nobody believes you anymore. You're doing this to exert pressure on Hamas. But I'll tell you this, you will not resolve this problem until, as we did in this country, you involve both of the participants. There's no point in having any kind of an alleged truce that only has one side in it. It was laughable, the rubbish produced by the Israelis, the Americans and the Egyptians. They didn't consult Hamas. I mean, that is just utter, absolute madness. And Tony Blair was involved in it. My God, that man is shameless, utterly shameless. He should keep his face out of the Middle East after what he and George Bush on the other side, yes, there were 3 mothballed schools used to store weapons. But this was discovered by the UN and reported by the UN, not by the Israelis. Then there's a situation where entire families are obliterated. In one case, 20 members of one family slaughtered. And the children, the disproportionate amount of women and children killed in this situation is a violation of all the spiritual beauty that Judaism stands for. The respect for life, the fact that if you save one life, you save the universe. All this blown out of the window. And blown out of the window, as I saw, by the arrival of 1,200,000 extremely right-wing former citizens of the Soviet Union.
Welcome back to Hardball. We're back with the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter. His new book is called Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. And President Carter, why did you use the word apartheid in the book's title?
Well, let's look at the entire title, if you don't mind. The first word is Palestine, which involves the land that belongs to the Palestinians, not the Israelis. I didn't refer to Israel because there's no semblance of anything relating to apartheid within the nation of Israel. And I also emphasized the word not, that is peace and not apartheid. That's what I hope to accomplish with this book, is some move toward that goal. But there's no doubt that within the occupied territories, Palestinian land, that there is a horrendous example of apartheid. the occupation of Palestinian land, the confiscation of that land that doesn't belong to Israel, the building of settlements on it, the colonization of that land, and then the connection of those isolated but multiple settlements, more than 200 of them, with each other by highways on which Palestinians can't travel, and quite often where Palestinians cannot even cross. So the persecution of the Palestinians now under the occupying territories is under the occupation forces is one of the worst examples of human rights deprivation that I know. And I think
even worse though than a place like Rwanda.
Yes, I think, yes. You mean now?
Yes.
Yeah,
I think the impression now of the Israelis, of the Palestinians by the Israelis, is worse than a situation in Africa like the oppression of Rwandans and the Civil War.
I'm not going back into ancient history about Rwanda, but right now, the persecution of the Palestinians is one of the worst examples of human rights abuse I know, because the Palestinians...
When you're talking about right now, you're not talking about, say,
I'm not talking about ancient history, no.
Well, Rwanda wasn't ancient history, it was just a few years ago.
You can talk about Rwanda if you want to. I want to talk about Palestine. What is being done to the Palestinians now is horrendous in their own territory by the occupying powers, which is Israel. They've taken away all the basic human rights of the Palestinians, as was done in South Africa against the blacks. And I make it very plain in this book that the apartheid is not based on racism, as it was in South Africa, but it's based on the desire of a minority of Israelis to acquire land that belongs to the Palestinians and to retain that land, and then to exclude the Palestinians from their own property and subjugate them so that they can't arouse and demonstrate their disapproval of being robbed of their own property. That's what's happening in the West Bank. And the people in this country, in America, never know about this. They never discuss this. There's no debate about it. There's no criticism of Israel in this country. And in Israel, there is an intense debate about the issues in this book. In this country, no.
I agree. I mean, I wish we had that sort of debate that they're having in Israel. I wish we had that in the United States. But give us a sort of sense, how much of the responsibility for the conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, do you think belongs to the Israelis for their tactics like seizing land and occupying territory that didn't belong to them? How much of it is the responsibility of the Palestinians for their suicide terror attacks and their bombings within Israel proper?
Well, as a matter of fact, the basic cause of the conflict is a sustained occupation of other people's land by the Israelis. And this is a direct violation of United Nations resolutions. It's a direct violation of the International Quartet's roadmap. It's a direct violation of the commitments that leaders of Israel have made in the past at Camp David when I was president and in Oslo, promising that Israel would withdraw from occupied territories. They have failed to do so. In response to that, and I'm not excusing them, there have been acts of violence. As a matter of fact, though, Hamas, the #1 accused persons of violence, have not committed an act of suicide bombing that caused an Israeli life now since August of 2004. And I hope that they won't do that anymore. Other participants of the Palestinian society, smaller ones, have committed some atrocities. But the loss of life in the entire occupied territories has been horrendous.
People have no chance to get their personal items out. They have no chance to call for help. And this is far away from most media outlets. You are amongst the very few journalists who have even seen this. European or American journalists who have even been here because people are afraid to come or it's too hard to come.
And one of the things we were told in Gaza by very respected Palestinian psychologist who had just completed a study of 1,000 Palestinian children was that they had discovered that many of these Palestinian children no longer had a will to live, that they were so dehumanized and so affected by seeing their fathers particularly beaten by Israeli defense forces, that the psychological condition is one of the dimensions of the conflict that is not widely understood.
Palestinians called for an international observer force that would stop the violence, but this action was blocked by Israel. Finally, a group of Palestinian and Israeli human rights activists together created the International Solidarity Movement, which has brought people from around the world of all ages and backgrounds to provide a nonviolent international presence to try to fill this need. Rachel Corey, a 23-year-old American student, went to Gaza to join in these efforts, sending back emails to her parents.
I have been in Palestine for 2 weeks and 1 hour now, and I still have very few words to describe what I see. It is most difficult for me to think about what's going on here when I sit down to write back to the United States. Something about the virtual portal into luxury. I don't know if many of the children here have ever existed without tank shell holes in their walls and the towers of an occupying army surveying them constantly from the near horizons. I think, although I'm not entirely sure, that even the smallest of these children understand that life is not like this everywhere.
It was Sunday afternoon in Charlotte, about noon actually, and I received a phone call, and my son-in-law, Kelly, was on the phone, and he asked if Craig was there. And something about the way he asked made me realize, I felt right away that something was wrong. And then I asked, why, Kelly? And he hesitated for a minute, and he said, we've had some very sad news. And then my daughter, Sarah, I could hear her in the background, and she got on the telephone, and she said, Mom, it's Rachel. And I think the first words out of my mouth then were, is she dead?
We were opposing the demolition of farmland and other property, Palestinian property, by Israeli destruction forces and bulldozers. And the bulldozer drove up, and it kept going, and she tried to move back, but she couldn't move back, and she got caught underneath. She got caught underneath the bulldozer. Many other internationals began to surround the bulldozer and yell at it and tell us that there is somebody there, and it did not stop.
Where Rachel was killed, she was protecting a doctor's home. And that's important to realize. And the 3 children, his wife, she knew that family, and that doctor felt that Rachel was like a daughter to him. He bought that house. It was in the middle of the neighborhood. There were other rows of houses between his house and the border. Those other homes, those other streets were all destroyed, and now it was his turn. And I've had people say, well, she was in a war zone, and Cindy points out that war zone is people's neighborhoods. Those are children.
I'm here for other children. I'm here because I care. I'm here because children everywhere are suffering, and because 40,000 people die each day from hunger. I'm here because those people are mostly children. We have got to understand that the poor are all around us, and we're ignoring them. We have got to understand that these deaths are preventable. We have got to understand that people in third world countries think and care and smile and cry just like us. We have got to understand that they are us. We are them. My dream is to stop hunger by the year 2000. My dream is to give the poor a chance. My dream is to save the 40,000 people who die each day. My dream can and will come true if we all look into the future and see the light that shines there.